For the last few years, we have gotten comment after comment about painting the Emperor's Children in the synthwave aesthetic. And now Games Workshop have finally released the Snaky Boy and Friends in Warhammer 40k. So guess what we're gonna do? If you guessed that we were going to paint the Emperor's Children in the synthwave aesthetic, you were wrong. I've always felt that Fulgrim's Finest have always had a bit more of a rock and roll hair metal vibe. Kinda like if Motley Crue were Space Marines. In this video, we're going to cover black armor, leopard print armor, and a little bit of synthwave sass just because we need some pink in there. Let's kick this off with black armor, and Captain Obvious, we're starting with black. And then our first actual color, which is Deep Ocean Blue, and then we're going to start to mix the highlights out of that Deep Ocean Blue and Ice Yellow. This gives us a neutral black before moving into a cold tone with warm highlights. But let's check out this application. Honestly, this sits somewhere between a non-metallic metal and a volumetric highlighting. Except we're not building up to the brightest, shiniest point like we would with non-metallic metal, and we're not really building any volumes like we would in volumetric highlighting. With this one, we're kind of aiming to diffuse the light across the armor. Kind of like how the light is already picking up naturally on the model itself. We're just going to give it a little bit of extra color. Now, because we want this to read as black, we're going to leave a lot of black in there. And then we're going to build up into those tones with a basic layering technique. But here's the real secret. I'm working with fairly thin paints, and sorry Duncan, but this time we don't want too thin coats. Because we still want it to read as black and we really more want to disperse the light more than anything, what I'm actually doing is using that one coat's transparency to build up onto the second so everything starts to show through. And then I'm going to come in with an actual black glaze and darken everything down. This is also going to smooth out the blends for us. You can see on the back of the legs they have a lot of ridges, but I'm going to ignore all of that and paint it like it's the same basic shape. While I'm still using the exact same tones in color and the exact same application method, this is going to look a little different. And that's because on the back of the leg there seems to be a harsher curve, which means all the light is going to be pulled into one direction more so than the other, so it's going to look a little bit shinier. The other thing you may have noticed is I didn't go to pure ice yellow. The ice yellow is in there to give us a warm tone to a cold highlight. And because it is warmer, it's going to feel like actual sunlight. I add ice yellow to a lot of paint when I'm mixing because it does give that luminosity. If you use the pure white to mix all these tones in, it would look a lot different. Especially when we come back with that black glaze to blend everything back and make it all sit properly. If these are supposed to be Emperor's Children, we need a little bit of pink, but we're going to sass it up a little. Let's add a little bit of that synthwave flair. I'm going to start off base coating with Diabolic Plum, just because it has a little bit better coverage and this is what we're going to start building the volumes on. I've seen a lot of people painting Emperor's Children this week and they've all gone the desaturated route. We're not going to do that. After our base coat of Diabolic Plums down, we're going to come in with Wicked Pink. And to try and keep in that saturation, this is going to be the highest highlight. But to blend down that transition, I am going to come in with 50-50 Diabolic Plum and Wicked Pink and just kind of paint through that little transition line. This is going to smooth it out and look a little bit prettier. Once that's blended back, I'm going to come back in with a glaze of Wicked Pink just to smooth it all out and kind of resaturate everything. And honestly, this can take a little while. Not stupidly long, but it's worth fussing around with a little bit. Once we have that sitting where we want, we're going to come back in with a glaze of Imperial Navy, which is an incredibly strong vivid blue. And this is going right into those shadow tones. Remember, when you're working with glazes and such thin paint, you need at least 3 layers before you can really decide if it's sitting where you want it to sit. Every pass, you're really just tinting the surface. Alright, it's time to kick it old school. For the bases of our leopard print, we're going to start with Blanche Berry before going to Sunburst Ochre and Wasteland Clay. And of course, a little ice yellow for highlights. But because they are such big jumps, we're going to be mixing 50-50 tones in between 2 colors every single layer. This will smooth everything out and it's honestly not as bad as it looks here. Now here's the thing, originally I was going to go and make it try and look like some kind of fur texture. Which means every single layer was going to be painted in line by line. Every crisscross that builds up a layer leaves inconsistencies and it really builds up an awesome fur texture. But this can take a while.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
So I went back to layering. Since we already have our base coat of Blanche Berry in there, this is our first 50-50 mix with Blanche Berry and Sunburst Ochre. And for this, we're going back to the basic volumetric highlighting. We're going to be leaving the darkest colors towards the side and the back and build higher and brighter towards the front. With this one, I'm also not worried about complete coverage. A little patchiness and inconsistency is going to help us lean back towards that fur texture. And since we're going to be painting leopard print on top of this, it's actually going to help it blend in a little bit better. A perfectly smooth blend with leopard print pattern sitting on top is going to look out of place. And remember from our skin tones video, it's okay to work back and forth, we kind of have to. Take the time, fix up whatever you need to fix up. I know we've done this a bunch of times on the channel, but let's run through it one more time. Now I know we've done a lot of animal print on the channel, but let's run through leopard print just one more time. All I'm creating here are little C shapes that are pointing in different directions and then little spots and splooges in between just to fill some area up. And here's the secret, for this, you do not want to be perfect. The inconsistency with size, shape, pattern, and even the opacity of the black paint itself in different areas is going to help us out. I actually thinned down my black paint just a little bit for this, so I do get a little bit of transparency here and there. One of the coolest things about painting Emperor's Children is that you can be just a little bit extra. Slaanesh is all about excess and being over the top. And that's why we're cranking the leopard print up to 11. Approaching the super warm browns and dusty blondes in the same way that I would approach non-metallic metal or volumetric highlighting really kicks this up a notch. Building up all of those shapes so they actually look like something underneath instead of just being flat with some black squiggles on top. Which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That was a fairly popular animal print back in the 80s, but with Emperor's Children we want a little bit more decadence. It should also stand to show you how cool brown can be when you want to actually approach it and use it for something more than leather pouches. And also, yes, if you took a non-metallic approach to this with the exact same colors in same succession, this would make a pretty awesome non-metallic metal gold. And as fiddly as these little leopard print shapes can seem, it's really not that hard. If you have a nice sharp brush and your paint is flowing correctly, you can knock these sections out in less than a couple of minutes. This is honestly one of the easiest freehand patterns to start with. The only thing I really recommend when painting leopard print is try to keep all the spaces similar between each print. It doesn't have to be perfect, you don't want it to be perfect, but at least this one kind of makes it look intentional. Before we wrap this up, we're going to go in and do some really quick non-metallic metal for this sword. All I'm doing here is taking that deep ocean blue and instead of the ice yellow, we're going to swap it out for company grey, which is a very light neutral grey. And again, we're going back to the same idea of building volumes. All I'm doing here is layer after layer every time I step up in brightness and mix a little bit more of that company grey into that deep ocean blue. I'm covering less of the previous layer. And as you can see here, I'm not being particularly smooth, I'm not really creating blends. As far as tones go, it's just layering and stacking lighter on top of lighter. Because the real trick to non-metallic metal is not about smoothness or blends, but it's about light placement. As long as the bright areas are incredibly bright and you've got some deep dark areas to contrast it against, it really doesn't matter. And while you might be thinking this looks a bit rough, I'm going to come in with company grey and just start doing all of the edge highlights. These clean crisp lines are more important than the blends that go under them. And now it's time for the money shots. You might want to get a towel. If I'm being completely honest, I think I like this armor a little bit more than the actual 40k Emperor's Children models. I'm still 100% going to get them, but I might end up kit bashing them with some Horus Heresy Marines. As always, a massive thank you to InGames, The Army Painter, everybody that's made it this far in the video, and of course all of our awesome Patreons that keep us running every week. Big love, you filthy animals.